Okay, my name is Madeline Killinger, and today I am giving a presentation on the hormonal control of implantation and early embryonic development. So implantation, just a little introduction. Implantation is the process where the embryo attaches to and embeds within the uterine wall. And this marks the beginning of pregnancy. So this process only succeeds because of the precise hormonal coordination between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and eventually the embryo itself. So today I'm going to walk through the key hormones, the timeline of their activity, and how implantation occurs, as well as what happens in early pregnancy when the placenta begins to take over. So I made this little table with the four key hormones and their roles. So estrogen is produced by the developing follicle and later the corpus luteum, and this stimulates growth and thickening of the uterine lining. Progesterone is secreted by the corpus luteum after ovulation, and it stabilizes that lining and prepares it for the potential embryo. Next is HCG. So if fertilization occurs, the embryo releases HCG, which keeps the corpus luteum active so it can continue to produce progesterone. And then LH and FSH from the pituitary drive ovulation and corpus luteum formation at the start of this process. So the big idea here is that each hormone's timing depends on the one before it, and they work in sequence carefully to help these processes move forward. So this slide made a little hormonal timeline. So just to kind of help visualize the process of ovulation and then once the placenta takes over. So this slide shows how the hormone levels shift through the cycle and then early into pregnancy. So during the first 2 weeks, days 0 through 14, estrogen dominates and thickens the uterine lining. And this is also known as the proliferative phase. After that, at approximately day 14, the LH surge triggers ovulation and progesterone levels start to rise. And then days 15 to 24 in the cycle, progesterone transforms the endometrium into a secretory state full of nutrients and blood vessels. So like preparing for implantation. And then day 21, sorry, this is supposed to say day 24. On day 24, implantation occurs and the embryo secretes HCG, which prevents the corpus luteum from breaking down. And we need the corpus luteum because by about week 8 to 10, the placenta begins producing enough estrogen and progesterone to maintain pregnancy on its own. And that is called the luteal placental shift once it goes from the uterus to the placenta being able to produce these hormones. So in this next slide goes into a little bit more detail about the implantation process. So it happens in these major steps. So the first one is apposition. And so when blastocysts align with the endometrial surface. So this is when they align, the embryo aligns with the uterine wall. And then next is adhesion. So once it's aligned, specific molecules like integrins and cytokines help the embryo stick to the endometrium. And then next is invasion. So invasion occurs as the outer trophoblast cells differentiate into two layers, the cytotrophoblast and the syncytotrophoblast. So the cytotrophoblast is the inner layer, and then the syncytotrophoblast is the outer layer that invades and then secretes the HCG. And then once it secretes the HCG, it signals the maternal system to maintain the progesterone production. And then while progesterone drives the decidualization, that's transforming the endometrium into the nutrient-rich tissue that supports the embryo. And then getting into the early embryonic development. So after implantation, after those steps we talked about in the last slide, the embryo continues developing while the placenta begins to form. So they kind of grow together. So the corpus luteum remains as the main source of progesterone for the first several weeks, but then as the placenta matures, it will gradually take over the hormone production. So progesterone continues to keep the uterus in check, and also helps with immune tolerance. Progesterone also helps keep the uterus calm and prevent contractions. And then estrogen promotes uterine growth and blood vessel formation. And then the HCG from the embryo ensures the corpus luteum stays functional until the placenta is ready to take over those jobs. And then, so this hormonal shift is crucial because without it, the endometrium would break down and the pregnancy wouldn't be able to continue. So the placenta being able to take over producing those hormones is a really, really important step in maintaining a pregnancy. And then this last slide, I kind of wanted to just emphasize the clinical relevance of these different hormone cycles and how each hormone and the stage that it plays a part in is really important, because that's where when things don't happen properly, then we run into medical issues and things that can be life-threatening. So understanding these hormonal relationships also helps to explain several clinical conditions that happen in real life all the time. So for instance, low progesterone or poor endometrial receptivity can cause implantation failure or early miscarriage. So this first picture on the left is just an angry uterus because the endometrial receptivity is low. And then, so there's also, it's called an ectopic pregnancy. And this is when the embryo implants outside of the uterus, often in a fallopian tube or even in the abdominal cavity. And that happens when hormonal signaling is abnormal. And then the last one on here that I wanted to talk about was IVF treatments. So treatments like IVF often rely on giving estrogen and progesterone to mimic the natural hormonal sequence and improve implantation success. So a lot of reason why people can't get pregnant is because their hormones are not functioning properly. And so IVF treatments can help ensure that everything is running smoothly. Also, birth controls also use these hormones, estrogen and progesterone, to mimic pregnancies to prevent you from getting pregnant. So all of these things emphasize that implantation succeeds only when the endocrine system, the uterus, and the embryo communicate in perfect hormonal harmony. Without any coordination or when something fails, then the pregnancy cannot progress. And to wrap it up, I just wanted to share this little practice worksheet that I made. It has 5 parts to it, just brief, but it summarizes and contains all the stuff that was talked about in this presentation. So the first part goes over key concepts, and then part 2 goes over the timeline review of the menstrual cycle, ovulation cycle, uterine cycle. And then part 3 talks about implantation steps, the steps of implantation of a fertilized egg. And then part 4 is just a short answer. And then part 5 is a quick concept check with multiple choice answers. So thank you so much. I appreciate you listening to me today. I hope you learned something. I definitely did.